A routine visit to the bank turns into an agonizing test of patience when a black woman is ignored for hours while others are served without question. But just when it seems like she'll never be acknowledged, an unexpected arrival shifts the entire atmosphere. Who really holds the power in this room? Let us know in the comments below where you're watching from, and buckle up for this shocking story. Nia Richardson adjusted the strap of her purse as she stepped into the polished marble lobby of Westbridge Financial. The fluorescent lights overhead cast a sterile glow over the pristine white counters, where tellers stood with rehearsed smiles assisting customers. The scent of freshly brewed coffee from the self-serve station mingled with the crisp artificial air conditioning. She checked the time, 2:45 p.m. She had exactly 1 hour and 15 minutes before closing. That should have been more than enough time to handle a simple request. Her heels clicked against the floor as she approached the reception desk, where a young blonde woman in a navy blazer barely looked up from her computer screen. "Good afternoon," Nia said, offering a polite smile. "I need to speak with a manager about my account. It's pretty urgent." The receptionist's gaze flickered up just for a second before returning to her screen. Her fingers continued to clatter against the keyboard. "Take a seat. Someone will be with you shortly." It wasn't exactly welcoming, but Nia brushed it off. Maybe the woman was just busy. She turned and made her way to the plush waiting chairs, where a few other customers were already seated. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Nia shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the front desk. The receptionist was now cheerfully chatting with an older white man in a suit, nodding attentively as he gestured toward the back offices. Within moments, a manager, a tall, balding man in a gray pinstriped suit, came striding out to greet him with a warm handshake. Nia sat up straighter. That had to be Robert Langston, the bank manager. She had done her research before coming here. If there was anyone who could resolve her issue, it was him. She stood and made her way back to the reception desk. "Excuse me. I was told a manager would be with me soon. I've been waiting for almost 30 minutes. The receptionist barely concealed a sigh. "He's busy right now. Just take a seat, ma'am." "Ma'am." The way she said it, like she was already irritated with her existence. Nia clenched her jaw and exhaled slowly through her nose. Fine. She would wait a little longer. But then it happened again. Another customer walked in, a young woman in a chic, form-fitting dress, carrying a designer handbag. The receptionist greeted her with enthusiasm, typing something into the system before saying, "Mr. Langston will be right with you." Not even 2 minutes later, the manager himself came out, shaking hands and ushering the woman into his office. Nia felt her stomach tighten. She glanced around at the other customers in the waiting area. Most were white. None of them had been sitting as long as she had. Her fingers curled into a fist on her lap. She knew what this was. Another 10 minutes. Another walk-in taken back immediately. The burning frustration in her chest only grew heavier. She stood once more and walked directly to the receptionist's desk. "I've been waiting for almost an hour now." Her voice was firm but controlled. "I was told I would be seen shortly, but I keep watching people who just walked and go ahead of me. What's going on?" The receptionist gave her a tight-lipped smile. "Like I said, ma'am, the manager is very busy. You'll just have to wait your turn." "My turn should have come a long time ago." The woman's expression didn't change. If anything, there was a slight, almost smug glint in her eyes. "Would you like me to schedule an appointment for another day?" Nia inhaled sharply, trying to control the growing heat rising to her face. "No, I don't want an appointment. I want to speak to the manager now, just like the people who walked in after me." A movement behind the counter caught her eye. Robert Langston had stepped out of his office, clipboard in hand, scanning the lobby. His gaze brushed right over her before settling on a middle-aged couple who had just entered. He strolled over to them with a broad smile. "Mr. and Mrs. Holloway, it's so good to see you again. Let me get you all set up, shall we?" Nia felt her stomach drop. This man, the one who had ignored her for almost an hour, was now enthusiastically guiding yet another set of customers into his office, acting as if she didn't exist. Her pulse pounded in her ears. For years, she had done everything right. She was professional, patient, polite. And yet, here she was, being overlooked as if she were invisible. The receptionist must have sensed her tension because she suddenly leaned in, her voice sickly sweet. "If you'd like, you can try coming back earlier in the day, when we're less busy." Less busy. Nia swallowed hard, blinking away the sting in her eyes. She had worked too hard, built too much, and come too far to be treated like this. She was about to say something, something sharp and cutting, when the front doors of the bank swung open. A group of 4 men and women in sleek suits strode in, their presence immediately commanding attention. The energy in the room shifted. Even the receptionist straightened up, her face suddenly alert. Nia didn't recognize them, but their confidence was unmistakable. The leader of the group, a distinguished-looking man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair, scanned the room before locking eyes on her. And then, to her absolute shock, his face lit up with recognition. "Nia," he called out, his voice carrying through the lobby. "I was hoping we'd run into you today." Every eye in the bank turned toward her. And for the first time in an hour, Robert Langston finally noticed her, too. Nia barely had time to process what had just happened before the group of executives advanced toward her. The man who had called her name, a commanding figure with salt and pepper hair, extended his hand with an easy familiarity that instantly shifted the entire mood in the bank. "It's been too long, Nia," he said with a warm smile. "How have you been, Nia?" Blinked, trying to place him. She had met countless executives and business professionals over the years, but at that moment, she was still reeling from the blatant disrespect she had endured for the past hour. Before she could respond, the other bank customers, those who had been serviced quickly while she was ignored, turned to watch the exchange. Even the receptionist straightened in her seat, her expression shifting from indifference to forced professionalism. Robert Langston hesitated in the doorway of his office, the clipboard he'd been holding now clutched tightly in his hand, his knuckles whitening around the edges. Nia finally found her voice. "I've been well," she said carefully, shaking the man's hand. "I wasn't expecting to run into you today." The man chuckled. "We've been meaning to stop by for a while now. We wanted to take a closer look at the management here before we finalize some decisions." Decisions? Nia glanced at the group behind him. 3 other professionals dressed in sharp, tailored suits stood beside him, scanning the bank with measured curiosity. Robert finally stepped forward, forcing a smile onto his face. "Mr. Whitmore," he said smoothly, extending his own hand. "A pleasure to see you again." Whitmore. That name landed like a thunderclap in Nia's mind. She knew exactly who this man was now. Thomas Whitmore was one of the senior board members overseeing Westbridge Financial's regional operations. He was the kind of man whose signature alone could alter the fate of entire branches. And he had just walked in here, greeting her first. Robert's smile faltered slightly when Whitmore only gave him a curt nod before turning back to Nia. "I didn't realize you banked here, Nia," he said, glancing around. "How's the service?" There was something in his tone, something light and conversational, yet layered with meaning. Nia knew what he was really asking. She could feel the weight of the room pressing down on her. The receptionist had paled, and the few customers still lingering nearby had gone completely still. Robert let out a nervous chuckle. "Oh, I can assure you, Mr. Whitmore, we pride ourselves on excellent customer service here." He turned to Nia, his voice using forced sincerity. "I apologize if there was any wait. We've been quite busy today." Nia stared at him, the heat of everything that had just transpired still simmering beneath her skin. For an hour, she had been dismissed, ignored, and treated like an inconvenience. And now, standing in front of a man who had the power to make or break his career, Robert was suddenly scrambling to rewrite the narrative. Nia could have let it go. She could have nodded politely, played along with his desperate attempt to smooth things over, and accepted his sudden change in tone. But she didn't. Instead, she straightened her spine and met Whitmore's gaze head-on. "I was actually just about to leave," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I had been waiting to speak with a manager for nearly an hour while I watched multiple other customers get assisted immediately." The tension in the room thickened. Robert's face darkened for a fraction of a second before he quickly recovered. Well, I assure you, that was never our intention." Whitmore held up a hand, cutting him off. His expression didn't change, but the shift in his demeanor was unmistakable. The easy warmth he had shown Nia was now replaced by something far colder, far sharper. "You waited for an hour?" he asked, his tone deceptively mild. Nia nodded. Whitmore turned back to Robert, studying him like an insect under a microscope. "Tell me, Mr. Langston, is that your standard policy for handling long-standing clients?" The color drained from Robert's face. I wasn't aware of the situation. I find that hard to believe," Whitmore said evenly. He gestured toward the waiting area. "She was sitting right there, wasn't she?" The receptionist looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Robert's jaw clenched, his eyes darting between them. "Sir, I can assure you, we value all our customers." "Do you?" Whitmore cut in, his tone sharp. Robert's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. One of the other executives, a tall black woman in a crisp navy blue blazer, finally spoke up. "This is exactly the type of conduct we've been reviewing, Thomas," she said, addressing Whitmore but never taking her eyes off Robert. "Bias in customer treatment. Prioritization of certain clients over others. I believe we have more than enough confirmation." Robert stiffened. Confirmation of what? Whitmore didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned back to Nia. "We actually came here today to assess this branch before finalizing our decision on management restructuring," he explained. "We've received concerns about operational disparities, but we wanted to see things for ourselves." Nia's lips parted slightly. They had already been investigating. Whitmore sighed, shaking his head. "And it seems we have all the confirmation we need." The realization hit Robert like a physical blow. "Wait," he stammered. You're not saying." Whitmore raised an eyebrow. "I think you know exactly what we're saying." The air in the bank felt electric, charged with a silent understanding that something irreversible had just happened. The receptionist's fingers trembled slightly where they rested on her keyboard. The customers, still pretending not to eavesdrop, exchanged glances. And Robert Langston, the man who had spent the last hour ignoring Nia as if she were invisible, now stood frozen in place, staring at the people who held his future in their hands. Whitmore exhaled. "I think we're done here." He turned to Nia once more, his expression softening again. "Nia, if you're still interested, we'd be happy to personally assist you with your account." For the first time that afternoon, the tension in her chest eased. She smiled, glancing at Robert one last time before turning back to Whitmore. "I'd appreciate that." As they walked toward one of the private offices, the hushed murmurs began. And behind her, Robert Langston stood in the center of the room, watching his entire world unravel. The door to the private office closed with a soft click behind them, sealing off the murmurs and stunned whispers still lingering in the lobby. Nia followed Whitmore and the other executives inside, her heartbeat finally slowing to a steady rhythm. The space was sleek and modern, furnished with polished mahogany desks and walls lined with framed awards boasting the bank's commitment to excellence. The irony wasn't lost on her. Whitmore gestured toward a chair. "Please have a seat." Nia sat down, smoothing her hands over her lap, grounding herself in the moment. She still couldn't believe how drastically things had shifted in just a few minutes. One moment, she was invisible, just another customer being ignored. The next, she was the center of attention, the silent proof of a problem that the executives had clearly suspected but needed to see firsthand. A woman in a navy blue blazer, Miriam Lewis, according to her nameplate, pulled out a notepad. "We apologize for what you just experienced," she said. "Unfortunately, this isn't the first report we've received about disparities in service at this branch, but yours is the most blatant case we've seen in real time." Whitmore leaned forward, folding his hands together. "We won't be keeping Mr. Langston in his position for much longer." Nia arched a brow. "That fast?" Miriam exchanged a look with Whitmore before answering. He was already on thin ice. "We were conducting this visit as a final evaluation before making a decision. What just happened out there, that sealed it." Whitmore nodded. "Langston's tenure has been under review for a while. We've had concerns about his leadership, but we wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. Clearly, we shouldn't have." Nia let that settle in. It was surreal, watching karma unfold so immediately and without warning. Robert Langston, the man who had brushed her off for over an hour, was about to lose everything in mere moments. Miriam clicked her pen. "If you're comfortable, we'd like you to provide a written statement about your experience today. It would help solidify our case." Nia hesitated. On one hand, she didn't need revenge. She didn't wake up that morning expecting to be a part of someone's downfall. But on the other hand, she knew that if she walked out of this office and stayed silent, nothing would change. The next black woman, or anyone who didn't fit Langston's unspoken priority list, would walk into this bank and endure the same treatment. She reached for the pen. "I'll write it." Miriam gave her a small nod, passing over a form. "Take your time." As Nia put pen to paper, the weight of the moment pressed down on her. She detailed everything. How long she had waited, the way others were assisted before her, the patronizing way the receptionist dismissed her, and most importantly, Langston's shift in behavior the moment he realized who she was connected to. When she finished, she set the pen down. Whitmore glanced over the statement, his expression darkening slightly as he read. This is exactly what we needed, he said. Thank you, Nia. She exhaled, feeling lighter somehow. Miriam tapped her fingers against the desk. I do have one more question for you. Do you have an interest in finance? Nia frowned slightly. I do. Why? Miriam and Whitmore exchanged another glance before Whitmore spoke. We're restructuring management, but we don't just want to replace Langston with another version of him. We want someone who understands customer needs and who actually values people, not just accounts. He tilted his head slightly. You ever thought about being on the other side of the desk? Nia's eyes widened slightly. You're asking if I'd be interested in a position here? Not necessarily at this location, Miriam clarified. But yes, we think someone like you could be an asset. It took a moment for the words to sink in. She had walked into this bank today expecting to be dismissed. Instead, she was walking out with an opportunity. I'd need time to think about it, she admitted. Whitmore smiled. Of course. If you're interested, we'll set up a formal discussion, but no pressure. Just something to consider. Nia nodded slowly. Thank you. I appreciate that. They stood, signaling the end of the conversation. As Whitmore opened the door, the tension that had filled the lobby earlier was still thick in the air. Robert Langston was nowhere to be seen, but the receptionist sat stiffly at her desk, clearly rattled by the events that had unfolded. A few customers were still there, eyes darting toward Nia with poorly concealed curiosity. Whitmore turned to her once more. It was good seeing you again, Nia. Take care. She shook his hand one last time before making her way toward the exit. As she stepped out onto the sunlit street, the fresh air hit her like a cleansing wave. For years, she had forced herself to swallow these moments, to accept them as just another part of life. But today, she walked out knowing she had forced the world to see her. The sun felt warmer on Nia's skin as she stepped out of the bank, a stark contrast to the cool sterility inside. The weight that had been pressing against her chest for the last hour had lifted, replaced by something else, something unfamiliar yet grounding. Power. She had walked in as just another customer, a black woman made invisible by the very people trained to serve her. But she had walked out seen. Her phone buzzed in her purse, snapping her out of her thoughts. She pulled it out and saw a message from her best friend, Jordan. How'd it go? Did they fix the account issue? Nia let out a small laugh under her breath. The account issue, that had been the only thing on her mind when she walked in. Now, it was almost an afterthought. She typed back a quick response. It's a long story. Call you later. As she slipped her phone away, she took one last glance at the bank's glass doors. Inside, the same receptionist who had dismissed her now sat stiffly, her face pale as she avoided eye contact with everyone. Whatever conversation was happening in the back office with Robert Langston was clearly not one he had expected to have today. Nia turned away and started toward the parking lot. She should have felt victorious. There was a certain satisfaction in watching karma unfold in real time, in knowing that the people who had once held the power were now at the mercy of those they underestimated. But she also knew this wasn't just about her. This had happened to countless others before her, black men, black women, people who had walked into that same bank, faced the same subtle yet crushing disregard, and had no one to step in at the right moment. She had just been lucky enough to have connections in the right places. That realization sat heavy in her stomach. She reached her car and leaned against the driver's side door, letting out a slow breath. Would anything actually change? Would Robert Langston's replacement be any different? Or would it just be another face, another name, another person who saw certain customers as priority and others as inconveniences? Her fingers tightened around the strap of her purse. Maybe the answer was in the opportunity Whitmore had presented her. She had never considered working in finance. It wasn't that she lacked the experience, she had a background in business, after all. But banking had always seemed like a world built for a different kind of person. People like Robert Langston. People who knew how to navigate privilege, to cater to those who already had access while keeping others at a polite but firm distance. But what if she could be the difference? What if she could walk into a space like that and demand real change, not just for herself, but for the people who would come after her? The thought sent a small thrill down her spine. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Jordan. Girl, did you burn that place down or what? Nia chuckled, shaking her head. She got into her car and pulled out of the parking lot, her mind still circling Whitmore's offer. The power dynamics had shifted today, but not just in the bank. Something had shifted in her too. She had seen what happened when silence was broken, and now, for the first time, she was starting to wonder just how much more she could change if she chose not to look away.